What up YouTube, it's Misery Hates Company. In this video, we are looking at Scarlet Witch. That's right, we are looking at Scarlet Witch again because she has so many different builds that are completely viable in both PvP and PvE. She's easily the most versatile hero in this game, which means Netmarble did a great job developing her, because you should always, as a player, feel like you have a ton of different options when you build a hero to make it your own and play to your playstyle, instead of what we've been getting for a while, which is a meta that requires you to do a very, very specific build. Now, don't get me wrong, from a content standpoint, it's been great because I've been able to make one video for every hero and then I get to move on to the next one. So it's been very easy to keep all my content organized in terms of the, best build, if you will. But this is now the third build video that I'm doing for Scarlet Witch. And honestly, I like it because there's no wrong way of building her, and the builds that I'm giving you, there's no best. It's just depends on your playstyle. So the last video I did was focused on doing high damage, basically playing by yourself in either single dimension duels or in Omega War. This one is all about teamwork. This is a control build. If you want to go in and be the true witch of the Scarlet Witch and do tons and tons of control effects and just make people's days miserable, this is the build for you. And without further ado, let's get straight to the video. Okay, so first things first, let's jump straight into the skills. The skills for this build is, again, focused on witchcraft. Now, the first skill that we're going to open with is going to be the create an illusion, and then it also powers you up. So think of this as it boosts your attack up to 5 stacks, which gives you at max stacks a 30% increase in your attack. From there, I want you to go ahead and open up on the individual. This is a very, very good build for Dimension Duel, but it can be used literally anywhere. And I want you to focus in on doing a single target damage here, but then also lowering their defense by 25%. That's right, 25% for 4.5 seconds. The next skill that I would highly encourage for, again, this is mainly for Dimension Duel, but it could be used anywhere, is going to be the Witch's Tongue Reality Warp. And that's because it makes you invisible and invulnerable for a few seconds, and then also recovers your ultimate gauge, because your ultimate is just so sick for Scarlet Witch. Now, the next one is we're just going to continue that control, and we're going to silence the target for 2 seconds and decrease their attack by 25% for 6 seconds, and then also deal damage equal to 19.1% of attack when cursed target uses attack. The name of this skill is Language of Demise Runic Wither. This is it has an AoE, so again, it's good for both single target as well as Omega War. I would mind you that it is dodgeable, so you do want to make sure you're close to them. So I would highly encourage you using Witch's Darkness, Witch's Descent first, and that's kind of like how you get behind the target, and then completely going all in on this one, which is again Runic Wither. And then I would go ahead and switch to Witch's Tongue Reality Warp. So basically your sort of rotation, if you will, would be 1, 2, 4, 3 on how I have these skills currently set up. Now, last but not least, again, the whole goal of this is control and just doing damage over time and just really making everyone have a bad day. So with this last skill, I chose Chaos Magic, Chaos Judgment. Now, the reason I picked this one is, mind you, it does not track well at all, but it does do a slight AoE, as you can see from the skill animation. But what it does do is have an incredibly low cooldown, and if you have max CDR, which you're going to want for this build, it's going to be right around 4 or 5 seconds, which is great because the dot, or damage over time is what dot stands for, lasts for 5 seconds, which basically means you do a lot of damage nonstop because you can keep that dot applied to as many people as you can hit every 5 seconds. And what that dot does is applies damage equal to 13% of attack per second. So the higher your attack, the more damage the dot does. And then it also increases stamina consumption by 30% when using a skill, and consumes additional dodge gauge by 30% when using a dodge skill. This was also the kind of soft counter to Spider-Man. Unfortunately, it doesn't track, so he could just dodge it, which is kind of ironic, but it is a thing. But it does do AoE, and I would highly encourage it for Omega War or Alliance Omega War. And with this build, as you can see, with the gear that I'm going to recommend here just momentarily, you do get +5 on 3 out of the 5 skills you're using. And again, that is going to be the 3 skills that you're buffing with this build are Terror Consumption, which is the opener that buffs your attack. You're also going to get Reality Warp, which increases the ultimate gauge recovery. And then last but not least is Witch's Descent. All of these are witchcraft skills, which is going to be the gear that we're going to be focusing on for this build. And there are a few other builds that I would recommend. Okay, so the first one is going to be Terror Assault, Shape of Terror. And then we're going to go straight into, and this one basically teleports us forward and decreases the movement speed of the target by 40% for 5 seconds and does 549% damage. Reason being is that I want you to jump in on the target, make them slow, so basically you grab onto them and they cannot escape. Now the next three skills really, you're going to see why, and I want you to stay on top of them. The next one is going to be Hex Projection, and this is just a quick little burst to give you that 34.38% of your max HP for 10 seconds. Now note, I'm not using the one that does more damage. Now you could switch between the two of these, but between the two, you get half the damage basically, but you get about a third cut off of your cooldown time. And I personally, for this build, I think you're going to want the shield a lot more frequently. So I would go for this one first. And keep in mind, it also knocks down when the skill lands. So after you teleport in and you use this, you do have the ability of knocking down your opponent. Now, the next one is where it gets pretty fun. This one does a ton of damage. It's going to be Witch's Darkness, Witch's Force Field. And this does 1,117% damage, again, with the buff that we're getting due to the gear that we're using, which we will cover momentarily. But it creates an energy sphere revolving around her body, dealing the damage damage to nearby enemies, decreases melee damage by 15% for 10 seconds. So basically, you're taking less melee damage and you're in their faces, which means like Iron Man, for example, if you jump on top of an Iron Man, instead of him using his projection skills, he's now going to be using his fist. So you're going to be taking less damage and you have a shield for your HP. And you're just doing a ton of damage to him. And he can't escape because you lowered his movement by 40%. Next one is just going to, and this is definitely applicable for, obviously not Dimension Duels, but for a Mega War. It confuses for 3 seconds when the skill lands, which honestly, you're probably not going to see too much in, you're probably not going to see that status effect land all that often unless you stack status effect, which you do get a decent amount from the build that I'm recommending, but releases energy to deal 230% damage and applies a confusion debuff. Releases energy transfers from one enemy to another to spread damage. Deals more damage if the enemy stacks on the same target. So basically, you jump into the middle, slow everyone down, get your shield, do the spinning balls of death is what we'll call them, and then you also pop this and the damage is bouncing between them all. Whew. Lots and lots of quick burst, right? And then last but not least, we're going to silence them off with Language of Demise. So same thing as we talked about for the last build. It does 2 second silence and all of the fun debuffs that you get from the Inflicted Curse. Now, I would probably, depending on your situation, I would probably use this one. Actually, I'm going to go and recommend that. Go and put this one in a 4 slot. That way, you just, as a mental note, instead of having to like pick where you're at, you can think of this as more of like a true rotation. So you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is literally the rotation. Jump in, slow them down, get your shield, do your balls of death, and then silence them for 2 seconds, and then have all of the damage bounce between all the people. Now, the reason I recommend this build as a viable option in group PvP, if built correctly, and this really is more for when you have this is very gear dependent. You cannot be too squishy with this build. You do need to have some very decent gear for it to work. But like I said, there's a specialization in particular that makes this a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and look at that, the gear first, and then we'll jump over to the specializations. So this one is, when it comes to the gear, there's going to be 2 that I recommend. The first one is going to be Dark Domain as a regional, and that's going to be because it gives you Defense Pen, which is fantastic for the PvP side of this build, and then Witchcraft class skill +6, which is what we're going for in both of these builds. Now, the special gear that I would recommend for this is is going to be Rise of the East. And that's because Witch's Darkness skill gets +7 and Witchcraft skills in general get +7, and you're going to be doing a ton of damage and control with this build. Moving on to specializations, this is where it gets a lot of fun with Scarlet Witch. I'm a big fan of her specializations, and she has a lot of flexibility. So the first one the first main ones that I would recommend is she doesn't do a lot of damage, so you want to increase her damage. So I would definitely recommend Hex Magic, increase all skill damage dealt to enemies by 30% but also increase the required stamina by 30%. I would then also hit up this one, which is Hex Domination, which increases damage dealt to immobile targets or targets with status effects. Guess what? Everything we do is status effects, so boom, more damage all the time. The next one I'm going to recommend is going to be Chaos Reset, and this is increased target skill cooldown by a couple seconds when attacking a target within 5 seconds after using a Chaos class skill on the target that has a status effect. Again, all of our skills do status effect, and the first build that I showed you, you're using 3 Witchcraft and 2 Chaos skills, which means between the two, you got it covered. Now, the next specialization that I'm going to recommend for that first build is this one, which is Witch's Branch. And again, like I said, we're using 3 Witchcraft and 2 Chaos, which is why these are the 4 specializations that I would recommend. This one fires magic that spreads to 5 enemies and deals damage equal to 135% attack and inflicts silence for 2 seconds when using a Witchcraft skill. Again, that's kind of how we like open up on the targets on both of these builds, and this is going to be a go-to for both builds, but definitely the first one. So again, for the first build, the 4 specializations you're going to use is this purple one, which is Branch, the orange one, Energy Equivalent Exchange, the yellow, Hex Domination, and then finally you're going to be using Chaos Reset. Now, for the second build, which is all about being close combat, again, you want to use Witch's Branch. You're going to use this one, which is increase all skill damage dealt to enemies by 30%. And the stamina consumption, same with the status effect, except I want you to change it, the last one. Instead of using the skill cooldown, I want you to use this one. Chaos Control, Chaos Confusion. Reason being, this is where it gets a lot of fun. When attacked while HP is 50% or lower, creates a magic explosion that deals damage equal to even at level 7, it's going to be 94.5% of attack and inflicts confusion on attack targets for 3 seconds and only a 12-second cooldown. Now, remember, this second build is all about close combat. Now, we do get some buffs and debuffs that we apply to everyone, but in the event that you do win, you get below 50% health, you basically explode, and then you use that explosion as when you confuse them to escape. Then you can get your, use the crystals, get some health back, wait for your health to recharge, whatever you need to do. But basically, you are, while you're in everyone's face, you do all your skills, you get blown up probably because they end up focusing you because you're just being really obnoxious. Your health gets below 50% health, and then boom, lo and behold, you're doing more damage again at max. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's definitely going to be over 100% attack, which is a ton. That's a lot of damage that you're going to be applying. And again, they're probably already affected by a status effect. So that's additional 30% damage there. And you just have this one already, which is additional 30% damage. So that's 60% increased damage. And it's going to be over 100% of your attack. As you can see, it's a pretty healthy explosion there that's going to do a lot of damage. And then, like I said, you retreat, get your health back, come back in, get your cooldowns back, and then jump in and do it all over again, because this is only a 12-second cooldown. Moving on for companions. Now, when it comes to companions, there is a new one that I would recommend for this build. And I'm actually need to change up my companions here a little bit, so I will show you. Let's see. So first things first, if you have Icarus, I would definitely recommend him. His buffs that he gets are fantastic for PvP, which is what we're focusing on for this. That's PvP damage increase and then PvP damage decrease, which is a lot of really good stats that you're going to want when you do PvP. But the newest hero companion that I'm going to recommend for this build is actually Loki. I'm a big fan of Loki because he gets status effect accuracy, which you do need. And then at the 6 star, he gets a flat percent or the percent attack. The collection stat is weird. You get the chill damage decrease, but the skill, oh man. For both of these builds, you basically drop a meteor, confuses them for 1.7 seconds, and then also increases damage they receive by 6 seconds. Now, keep in mind, both of these builds are focused on either a ton of damage or a ton of control or being in their face. So imagine being in their face, dropping Loki on top of you. You get those buffs, you get the debuffs, and then boom, Loki comes in. You're doing 20% more damage to the people around you. Yeah, all of this stacks very, very nicely and is going to be it's just going to work wonders with the right build. Again, you're going to want some nice battle badges and nice gear. Ideally 6 stars, nanos would be preferred. Again, it's not like a full-on whale build, but it's definitely going to be one that you don't want to use too early. If you want to see an early game build for Scarlet Witch, I would recommend my first video, which I will link at the end of this one. So other companions that do well with her are obviously Baron Mordor. Another really good companion would actually be Ultron for the HP increase barrier, because again, you're going to be in their face for the second build, and even the first build, you're really squishy, so he's a very viable option, especially for free to play. Hulk is Hulk. I would recommend Hulk, he's Hulk. Anyone else that pops out, you could definitely make a case for Kate Bishop. She does some decent damage there and also decreases the defense. But really, those would be the ones that I would recommend. If you want to go hard counter to other Scarlet Witches, you can go Wong. If you're worried about Hulk, go America Chavez. If you just want to try to do additional AoE damage, you could do Moon Knight. But Loki is the one that I will be running with this build, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun with him. That's going to go ahead and do it for today's video. Now, I would highly recommend you guys checking out the previous video, like I've been mentioning, where I do focus on more of a PvP all damage build. And that video is going to be linked right here. So check this out right now. And that also shows you the Omega cards and the battle badges I would recommend for Scarlet Witch. Until next time, lock it in.